Hey friends, today we are here answering the question, is dairy healthy? This is quite a controversial topic. You will see all sorts of extremes on this perspective. You will have people saying that you should be drinking raw milk every single day, and then you have other people saying that gluten and dairy are the first things that you should cut out of your diet if you are trying to heal your gut or any type of autoimmunity. And it can be really confusing when you're seeing all these different extremes in the health sphere. So I'm going to actually break the science down for you, and I'm going to tell you what is actually the pros of dairy, what are actually the cons of dairy, how you can include dairy in your diet in a healthy way while you are healing, and any negative effects that dairy might potentially have on you, and when to know when to eliminate it and how to mitigate those negative effects. So as always, we try to take a very balanced, ancestral, and science-backed approach here at Whole Body Healing. So by the time you're done with this, you should know more than you ever wanted to know about dairy and all the ins and outs of it. First of all, I want to break a very specific myth. And this is the rhetoric you will hear a lot of people say that, well, other animals don't drink milk after the point of infancy. No other animal still drinks milk into adulthood. And that's very true, but humans also do a lot of things that other animals don't do. Humans also ferment their food, store their food, cook their food, process their food. So I really don't think this is a valid argument on why we shouldn't eat dairy, because humans are very different than other animals in a lot of the ways that we have ancestrally consumed food. So I want to put that aside and focus on the fact that humans have a lot of techniques and strategies and processes to include very nutritious foods in their diet that other animals might not be able to access in the same way. So putting that aside, let's talk about first the pros of eating dairy. I want to first focus on this because you might be asking the question, well, who cares? If there's even a chance that it could be inflammatory on my gut, why would I even bother? So here's some reasons why dairy might be a really good way to get some key nutrients in your diet. So first of all, dairy has extremely digestible fats and proteins. There are scientists who study the digestibility score of proteins, and you can actually look this up. It's a really fascinating score that they use, and they basically break down the amino acids of different types of proteins and see which ones are most easily absorbed by the human digestive tract. And this means that there are some proteins you'll eat that are broken down in a way that are not as digestible by humans. And these are generally things like grains, beans, nuts, seeds that have a little bit of protein in it, but we only absorb about 60, 70, sometimes even 50% of those proteins. So even if on paper it looks like there's a fair amount of protein in some of these foods, we're only absorbing about half or maybe a little more. Things like meat are usually around the more like 80 to 90%, right? Whatever is on paper, we're absorbing about 80 to 90% of that protein. The two foods that hit nearly 100% absorption rate are eggs and dairy. So the proteins in dairy are very easy for humans to break down and absorb. And so if you're trying to get a good amount of bioavailable protein in your diet, dairy protein is actually really great to include in your diet. Same with fat. A lot of people find that dairy fat is easier for them to digest than other types of fats. In fact, when people are having gallbladder issues or liver issues where they're noticing they've got a lot of oily stool or they get very nauseous if they try to eat more fat in their diet, sometimes heavy cream or sour cream, cultured cream, is the thing I will recommend the most for these folks. This is part of the reason that some of these dairy fats are so popular on more ketogenic type diets, is because it's a great way to get a lot of fat in your diet that is easier to digest, easier on your gallbladder, and not as difficult as just, drenching your food in olive oil or whatever other rendered fat, beef tallow, whatever you're trying to use. That can definitely get a little old after a time of just drenching your food in oils, and so including some high quality dairy fat can be a great, easy way to get more fat in your diet. And this is not really in the scope of this particular video, but we do know that saturated fat is incredibly important for the health of our nervous system, our brain, our hormone health, our immune health, etc. And so dairy fat can be a great option for that. Dairy also has a very high mineral content. So a lot of people know that dairy is naturally very high in calcium. It's also naturally pretty high in magnesium, and even decently high in potassium, which are our primary electrolytes, right? Besides sodium, I've just named all the electrolytes. And so I have had clients who have had a really hard time feeling like they could stay hydrated, and we do all the electrolyte supplementation, but when they finally start including some high quality dairy in their diet, they feel like they're a lot more hydrated on a cellular level. Like they feel like they're actually retaining those minerals, because we know hydration, it's not so much about how much water you're drinking. That's a part of it for sure. But a lot of it is actually about how many minerals you are getting. And so yes, we can add electrolytes into your water. That can be very helpful and important, but some people find that they naturally feel very hydrated when they've got some high quality dairy in their diet. Hi, Wendy. Got a meower here. We know that a balance of magnesium and calcium is essential for our nervous system health. It also helps us with our blood sugar balance, our insulin sensitivity, and our ability to have a balanced stress response. Both calcium and magnesium are naturally very calming minerals. And so having good sources of these in your diet is really essential. And it's not always easy to get a good amount of calcium in your diet without dairy. We definitely can do some leafy greens. We can definitely do some bony fish and things like that. There are ways to get calcium in your diet without dairy for sure, but this is just such an easy and bioavailable way. So you can see all these great reasons to include dairy in your diet. It's very easily digestible protein, very easily digestible fat, and really good sources of some of our primary electrolytes, especially calcium and magnesium. And as well, with the fat comes the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K. So butter and ghee are especially good sources of this because these vitamins are concentrated in the fat. Now, vitamin A, a lot of people will say, oh, leafy greens, orange vegetables. That's actually not the type of vitamin A that humans can absorb. They must convert it in the body, and a lot of people don't have the genetics to actually do this appropriately. I'm one of those people. I had my genes sequenced a long time ago when I was first starting my healing process, and I don't have the gene that converts beta-carotene, the plant-based vitamin A, into the usable form of vitamin A in the body. So I have to get my vitamin A from animal foods. Now, you can also get this from fatty fish. Certainly dairy isn't the only source of this, but dairy is a great source of these vitamins that are only in animal fat. And so dairy is a great source of these. So now we understand the pros, why you might want to include dairy in your diet for some very high quality, easily digestible, easily absorbed nutrients. Now, what are the cons? Why is it that when you go to, your run-of-the-mill functional doctor or functional nutritionist, they're going to tell you if you want to heal your gut, you need to cut out gluten and dairy. It's often listed in the top inflammatory foods before even things like corn or soy are mentioned. I don't really think that's fair to dairy, but there are some things that are true. Now, the first thing that causes problems for people and is the source of most people's dairy intolerances and the inflammatory response that people get from dairy is lactose. So lactose is a long chain sugar. So this means it has to be broken down in order to properly digest it. And when it's not broken down, it's going to feed bacterial overgrowth. It's also going to be very irritating for the gut. And this is why a lot of people will get bloating, distension, really smelly flatulence, diarrhea, all sorts of digestive symptoms when they eat too much lactose. There are people who just genetically do not produce the enzyme to break down lactose. The enzyme is called lactase. Now, part of some people's proponents for drinking raw milk is that raw milk naturally has a little bit of this enzyme. And so for some people, they find they do a little better when they haven't heated the enzymes out of the milk. When you pasteurize, you do kill off those enzymes. But even so, sometimes that little bit of natural lactase is just not enough. Some people are truly very lactose intolerant. They don't produce this enzyme properly, and if they have lactose, it really is going to wreak havoc on their gut microbiome and their digestive health. So this is very true. There are a lot of adults that do not produce this enzyme naturally, and it tends to be very specific ethnic groups that have evolved with cows, sheep, goats, right, herding animals that have developed the ability to break down this sugar even into adulthood. But it's a fairly small percentage of the population. Now, what is the solution to this? The solution is to have your dairy without lactose. And there are actually cultures who rely heavily on dairy in their diet who do not genetically produce this enzyme. Maybe they have even been herding for long periods of time and they still don't make this enzyme. And so what they do is they ferment their dairy. When you ferment your dairy, you introduce beneficial bacteria that break down sugars. Remember how I said that a lot of the opportunistic pathogenic bacteria can feed on the lactose sugar. Well, a lot of good bacteria can feed on this sugar too. And so if you promote the growth of this good bacteria in the milk or cream, it's going to eat that lactose. And after about 24 hours, you're going to have lactose-free dairy. So, for example, there is a fascinating anecdote from Dr. Bill Schindler, who is an anthropologist who has spent some time with the indigenous people of Mongolia, who about 80% of their calories come from yak milk. Now, these people are genetically lactose intolerant, and yet they are eating 80% of their calories from dairy. How do they do this? They only eat this yak milk properly fermented for at least 24 hours, and many times in these kinds of traditional cultures, they're fermenting them for weeks or months even. So they're eating some very, very potent probiotic stuff. And then you get yet another potential benefit from dairy that we didn't even talk about before, which is it can be an amazing source of probiotics if you are fermenting it properly. So in a lot of regions, they do kefir or kefir. There's all sorts of different types of yogurts all over the world that are done. And again, no lactose if you are properly fermenting it over 24 hours. And now you're getting this added bonus of all these incredible beneficial microbes for your gut. Now, if you have histamine intolerance or mast cell activation syndrome and you are very sensitive to histamines in food, I do generally make you completely cut out dairy except for maybe ghee or butter, which naturally does not have any lactose in it, until you can start to tolerate fermented foods again, because then I'm only going to want you to bring in lactose, other types of lactose-free dairy, which means properly fermented dairy. And that's going to be a great source of probiotics that is going to make sure that your gut health continues to improve for years and years and years when it's been devastated by antibiotics or other unfortunate events. So, lactose is a big problem. But We can solve that problem through proper fermentation. This does mean that generally you have to make your own yogurt, kefir, or other fermented dairy products because most store-bought yogurt, sour cream, kefir is only fermented about 6 to 8 hours. You can always call a company and ask, but nearly every company I have called says, nope, we only ferment it for 6 to 8 hours. The only exception to that is Tremona yogurt, which you can get at Whole Foods, and they are familiar with the need for lactose-free dairy products when you are trying to heal the gut, and so they actually ensure that they ferment their dairy long enough. There is no lactose left in it. But generally most products are not going to be good if you're really trying to be truly lactose-free. Now, what's another potential issue? Another potential issue is the casein protein. So in my experience, this is a bit less common. For most people, lactose is the primary inflammatory factor when it comes to dairy. The other issue, though, is casein. So casein is the protein in dairy, and some people can have a true allergy to casein. Allergies come from the proteins in a food, and so if someone has a true dairy allergy, it's to the casein protein. Now, depending on how sensitive you are, many people are able to still do ghee or butter. You still get the benefit of the highly digestible fat and the ADK, the high fat-soluble vitamin content. But it may be that other types of dairy are going to be too inflammatory for you or cause too much of an allergic type response. Now, here's what can happen. Even without a true allergy, casein, if it's not broken down properly, if you have a very weak digestive system, it can be absorbed into the body as something called a caseomorphine. Yes, you heard that right, morphine. So, the casein protein in dairy, if it's not broken down properly, can turn into an opiate-like substance in the digestive tract. And this can change our brain and neurological function. So, there has been especially correlations with autism, Tourette's, tics, really severe mental health issues like major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, things like this, associated with these opiate-like substances that may be absorbed from dairy protein that has not been broken down properly. So this is a concern. Again, this is a less common problem, but it is a problem that needs to be addressed. There is a potential workaround here. The potential workaround is to source what is called A2 dairy. So, a few hundred years ago, there was some breeding done to cows that ensured that the cows would make higher production of milk. Now, the milk became a bit less nutritious because basically they bred in a pituitary abnormality to the cows that makes them produce higher amounts of milk of less quality. These are your run-of-the-mill Holstein cows that you see on most dairy farms, and they produce what is called A1 dairy. So most conventional dairy that you see in the store, most cheese, milk, sour cream, yogurt that you see at the store is going to be from these types of cows. These proteins are not as well digested. Again, they kind of traded quality of the milk and digestibility of the milk for a higher production from the animals. So, if you look for heritage breed cows that produce A2 milk, which is the older type of dairy that humans have been eating for much longer periods of time, some people find that this dairy protein is much more digestible, and there are actually people who thought they had a casein allergy, but they switched to A2 dairy, and now they don't have an inflammatory response to it. So anyone that's concerned that dairy is going to cause an inflammatory response, or they feel like when they eat dairy they get this inflammatory response, first look to the lactose, of course, so only ghee, only butter, or only properly fermented yogurt, kefir, or also long fermented cheeses. I forgot to mention that. At least 60 days of fermentation usually ensures no lactose in the cheese, so no soft cheeses. But then look to the casein. And so I mentioned, you want to look for heritage breeds of cows. You want to look for products that are marked A2, but you can also look for the following labels, because not everyone jumps through the hoops to get the official A2 designation. It's a whole labeling regulatory board that is a bit of an ordeal to deal with. So there are many farmers who will simply do goat dairy or sheep dairy, or even water buffalo dairy, some people are doing now. So these, because they're all heritage breed animals, they produce A2 dairy by default. So if you get goat or sheep or water buffalo or camel or any of these other animals, it will be an easier digestible dairy protein. Or you can look for people who say they use heritage breed cows. So for example, Jersey or Guernsey cows are going to be the ones that you see the most. And so these are going to be ways to ensure more digestible dairy. So those are the main concerns, you guys. The main concerns on why dairy is inflammatory is because of the lactose content and because of the casein content. And if we address those two things by proper fermentation and sourcing more digestible heritage types of milk that are A2, a lot of those inflammatory concerns are mitigated. And then we get all the benefits of the dairy that I started out this episode with. Now, there are some other concerns. I'm going to go back to the raw dairy concern for a moment. I know this is quite controversial, and I don't feel super strongly one way or the other, in fact. I do find that for some people, raw dairy seems to be digested much better. They seem to get more benefit from it. They feel better once they start drinking it. So I don't personally have a lot of concerns with the safety of it, as long as you are getting your dairy from a farm that is actively testing their milk, and a reputable farm will be actively testing their milk to make sure no bad bugs slipped in. Because it is true, nature can be a little wild at times, and sometimes something untoward will slip into the milk. Especially if you're not, drinking it right from the teat, so to speak. If it's, being bottled in a jar and sent somewhere, there's more opportunity for something to go wrong. So of course you would want to source it from a reputable farm that is very clean and actively test the milk. But there are many people that don't feel comfortable with raw milk because there is the potential for danger. Now, that being said, there's also potential for danger anytime you eat a raw vegetable or you store leftovers in the fridge. I think people tend to single out raw milk as a big food safety issue, when in reality, anything we eat that's raw, there's the chance that we're going to get ill from it. You see people recall carrots and spinach and, lettuce and all sorts of vegetables all the time for concerns about contamination from bacteria. So I don't think we should single raw milk out, but I think we need to be diligent about all the food we eat. But if you don't feel comfortable drinking raw milk, that's totally fine. You can get a lot of the benefits of dairy without it being raw. So I always tell my clients, that's completely fine. There's no concern there. I do recommend, however, that you look for just regular pasteurized milk. What's really popular today is ultra pasteurized, right? And homogenized, right? You'll see this a lot too. Homogenized and ultra pasteurized. The reason they do this is some people don't like that there's the cream sitting on top. They want it to just, be all together so there's not the separation of cream and milk. But it breaks apart the proteins in the homogenization process, and there's some concerns that it might lower the nutritional value of the dairy, so it's really unnecessary. Just look for non-homogenized. And then ultra pasteurized is a similar thing. It's popular because it has a much longer shelf life. You are really killing everything in that milk, right? But the problem is that they're heating it to ultra high temperatures that milk probably shouldn't be heated to, and it starts to, again, distort the proteins, denature the proteins, which lowers the digestibility of it, lowers the nutritional content of it, and it's really unnecessary. It's perfectly safe to just have low heat or regular vat pasteurized milk or cream if you don't want it to be raw. So those are my recommendations, is to either look for low heat or just regular pasteurized and non-homogenized dairy. And I encourage you to try making your own dairy ferments. It's actually quite easy to make your own yogurt or make your own kefir or make your own cultured cream. There's lots of kits online that teach you how to do it. You can even order kefir grains on Amazon now or off of Etsy. And it's a really fun process to like bring your dairy to life in that way and to get to know your microbes, your friendly neighborhood microbes, and to build a relationship with it as you're cultivating this wonderful fermentation and you're reusing these grains over and over, and you're cultivating a much more diverse microbiome in yourself. So I'm always encouraging people, as they're on my protocols and as they start to stabilize any kind of histamine intolerance, that they start bringing in this well-fermented dairy, so you're getting all the nutritional benefits and you're also getting all that probiotic goodness. So that is my spiel on dairy. I hope that explains the confusion about why some people say that it is inflammatory and how we can mitigate any of those concerns or effects. All right, thank you for listening.